So Jane was a colleague of mine formerly at Trinity, and really loved the work that Jane does. She's I think she describes herself as a I'm going to get this wrong now, Jane, a middle ages historian. Did I get that right? Early modern. Thank you. Sorry, I was close enough. For those of you. For those of you actually who've been following the wonderful show on RT that's been running on RT Sunday evening called Out from This Island, that's Jane's creation. It's a fabulous show. If you haven't seen it, please do. It's on the player now. It's absolutely wonderful. It tells the history of Ireland through the voice of Colin Farrell, actually, and it tells it through the centuries and the impact that Ireland has had in the world. Really wonderful, beautiful production. So again, I want to congratulate Jane. It's absolutely fantastic. And we're delighted to have Jane today. And without further ado, I'll introduce you to Professor Jane Ohlmeyer.
Thank you, Leonard and Mary Rose, for the warm welcome. So, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, absolute privilege to be here this afternoon. We're going to have a cracking couple of days, I can just tell. So, an impossible task. Leonard says, Jane, would you ever just say what lessons we can draw from looking at history? And I'm like, Leonard, how many hours, how many days? 30 minutes. So here we go. As Leonard had just alluded to, I'm an expert actually on what we call the early modern period, which are those sort of 1500 to 1700. But he's pushed me way outside my comfort zone. I'm just giving the book a quick plug as we go. But actually, I'm going to ask that big question. Can we draw lessons from the past? So probably these are quotes that are well known to you. The Edmund Burke one, those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. He didn't actually say that, folks, but anyway, it's misattributed to Burke. He said something quite similar, but not exactly that. But Churchill probably did. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I'm hoping to this particular audience, we all really appreciate that until we understand how we got here, we don't know who we are, and we don't know where we're going. So obviously there are some really powerful lessons that we can learn from history. So even though this is a conference that's very future-looking, 2004, I'm going to be suggesting things from the past, trends from the past that I think are going to continue into the future. But I just want to begin with two very brief anecdotes. The first is COVID. Do you remember back in March 2020? I was having dinner with an amazing scientist, a man called Luke O'Neill, one of Ireland's great immunologists. You're all nodding. He became a household name during the pandemic. And it was the 10th of March, and COVID was circulating. And I said to Luke, what's the crack with this COVID? He says, Jane, you're a historian. You should be able to answer that. What do you mean? He says it's going to be like the Spanish flu of 1918. He says we're going to have absolute havoc for the next 2 to 3 years because people won't be able to develop a vaccine quickly enough. Now, as it turned out, we did develop a vaccine quite quickly, but by looking to the past, it really informed how Luke and others thought about the present. Another quick example for you. The world is in a very extraordinary place today. I mean, what's happening at the moment across the globe is utterly exceptional. Whether we look at the economic instability, the political instability, the rise of these autocrats. When did we last see this in the world? In the 1930s. And look where that took us. So I think, again, by looking at the past and looking at trends from the past, it really can and should shape our thinking, not just about the present, but about the future. Now, I'm going to focus just on our little island here. A lot of what I'm going to say over the course of the next 25 minutes will be drawn from this RTE series called From That Small Island, The Story of the Irish. I'm just curious, obviously Leonard has seen it, but has anybody else had a chance to look at any of the episodes? Well, for those of you who haven't, if you like what you've heard, they're on the RTE player, folks. But we also have a 90-minute feature. I was privileged to be part of a group and worked with an amazing scriptwriter and an absolute dynamo called Brianna Nidermida. And she and I managed to bring this to fruition. But in large part, thanks to another very special person who's in the room, John Kincannon. And we're going to be hearing from John over the course of the next few days, and particularly tomorrow. But John, Eamon, so many of you were very, very supportive in allowing us to get this made. And again, I hope those of you who do see it enjoy it. But it really looks at the history of Ireland from earliest times to the present day. And its big focus is, what does it mean to be Irish? And that's something that I'm going to focus on in this talk. And as I do that, I want to think about our comings, the people who come in, and especially how we respond to colonialism, because that profoundly shapes us. I also want to think about our goings and immigration, because immigration has profoundly shaped us as a nation as well. And apologies in advance, because I don't have time to develop anything fully. Really happy to take questions at any point over the next 2 days, but it will be a bit of a helicopter view, and an airplane view, because actually, Leonard mentioned the technological revolution that the cable triggered, but what was really so innovative was air power. Up until really the mid-20th century, it was all about the sea. The sea, the sea, the sea. The sea lanes and the rivers were the superhighways of the ancient world, of the pre-modern world. And it was the sea that brought people to Ireland. It was the sea that took people from Ireland. So let's think about the comings. We reckon, and when we're talking about this really prehistory, this very ancient period, we really are very reliant on the work of our colleagues who are geneticists, archaeological geneticists, people like Dan Bradley, Lara Cassidy, Eileen Murphy, who are doing this amazing work with genetic DNA. And they're able to document these very early settlers. The ones that many of us are descended from, however, are people who came from the Pontic Steppes. So the Ukraine. So I don't know if people have done the Ancestry.com spitting in the test tube thing, but if you do, you'll see all of these. Many of us will have Ukrainian DNA, and it goes back to these Bronze Age settlers who came. And it's really, they are the base genetic pool, the Vikings, the Anglo-Normans, many other European powers settled in Ireland. And then, of course, from the 1530s, we have very intense colonists coming with the Welsh, the Scottish and the English, along in more recent times with peoples from Asia and from Africa. And I'm going to conclude by asking, what does this mean in terms of Irishness? Because people come, and of course they intermarry, they become assimilated. And what does that mean for Irishness? I can't resist giving you a quick peep at this man. He's called Rathlin Man. And as part of From That Small Island, we actually used amazing folk at the University of Liverpool to take his DNA, which Dan Bradley had extracted, and working with Eileen, who is a osteoarchaeologist, we were able to take a skeleton that she had from Rathlin Island and to actually reconstruct his face, including his eye colour. The amount of information we have about Rathlin Man is absolutely extraordinary. Remember, this is 2000 BC. So you're looking at one of our closest ancestors, folks. And I'm telling you, if you walked along Rathlin today, they all look like that. But that's Rathlin Man. Gonna fast forward though and talk about what I call the more modern period, which really is when we see the intense colonization of Ireland from the 12th century, first by the Normans, and then it really gathers, if you want, steroids in the 16th century after the onset of the Protestant Reformation, where we see very large numbers of colonists coming into Ireland. Ireland was England's first colony. Some people, I'm not going to make a comment about Northern Ireland, so pretend I didn't say that. And Ireland is very much of a colony, and it was all about colonisation. And we're talking about settler colonialism here. It was about the introduction of the English legal system, but it was all about cultural imperialism as well. It was about introducing the English language, English culture, English dress, English architecture, agricultural practices, and of course the English religion of Protestantism. And I'm really talking about here from the 1570s. This becomes extremely widespread across the island. And hand in hand with cultural imperialism, we see economic imperialism. In other words, Ireland only exists to enrich England and increasingly to feed and to service an English empire. So in that sense, the Irish economy is a subservient one. And the English do that in part by confiscating land, I'll talk about that in a minute, but also intense commercialisation and urbanisation. Now, when we talk about empires, empires are about the exercise of power, and that usually rests on a bed of pikes. And in Ireland, and let's be realistic, folks, these societies in the Middle Ages and the early modern period are very violent ones. But what we see with the English conquest of Ireland is a level of violence that really is extraordinary. And we see it being perpetrated very much as a tool of empire against the civilian population, particularly against women and children. So it's not just your normal levels of violence, it really is at a higher level, particularly here in Munster in the 1570s, as the Desmonds go into rebellion. Munster, then the English army moves in and doesn't just kill people who were fighting against them, it just moves against the local population. And we see this happening time and again in Ireland, the use of violence. And that's something that I think, to understand the scale of that, look at what's happening in Gaza today. That was Ireland in the mid-17th century. I just want to try and allow people to imagine just how utterly destructive colonialism was at that period. I do a lot of work with Rita Duffy, and here is her representation of violence against women, which of course is the norm in these conflicts, particularly in the Middle East, the Ukraine. Hand in hand with extreme violence goes expropriation of land. Because remember, in this period, land equals money, equals political power. And when the English come in, they want to take as much Irish land as they possibly can. And over the course of the 17th century, about 8 million Irish acres, that's about a third of the land mass of Ireland, is confiscated and then reallocated to these settler colonists who come. We've plantations all over the country. The ones in Munster and Ulster are simply the best known. But it means that now the English Protestant colonial population has access not just to large acres, but to the best land. Because, as we're going to see in a moment, the Irish are either dispossessed or sent to Connacht. Now, Connacht is beautiful, best views, but the worst land. And then it was these people who, in the mid-19th century, in the wake of the famine, were then cleared off the land altogether in the clearances. So again, just a feature of the past. Along with the expropriation of land goes transportation. We see this particularly during the Cromwellian period of the mid-17th century, when tens of thousands of people would have been rounded up by Cromwell and his forces and shipped primarily to Jamaica and to Barbados. And I don't know, I had the privilege of filming in Barbados from that small island, and I cannot tell you how utterly I mean, it's hard to find words. It was so hot. It was so humid. We went into one of the sugarcane fields, and you were just trying to imagine what life would have been like for these people. And we have a third of the transportees were female. Many of them were as young as 5. Large numbers of Irish speakers. I mean, it wasn't as bad as the black chattel slaves, but it was pretty grim. And interestingly, in Barbados today, we have communities of redlegs. Are people familiar with the redlegs of Barbados? They're the direct descendants of these people who moved in the 17th century. They still live in the northern part of the island. They're called the Ekibekis because their skin has been destroyed by the sun. Or the other name that the Barbadians gave them were the Johnny back rows, because they're in the back row of the church. They're the lowest rung in society, all direct descendants of this transportation. Now, I'm just talking about transportation from Ireland. Obviously, it becomes a feature of the British Empire, particularly. We see transportations, for example, to Australia in a later period. The other thing is Ireland provides human capital in the form of indentured servants. Now, indentured servants go voluntarily, but this whole notion of indentured service, again, another feature of the British Empire that we see. Again, Ireland's very much a laboratory of empire during this period. And I'm just simply mentioning it here because I think it's really important that when we talk about some of the things that are going on in the modern world, that we really understand our own experiences of these. The other feature of empire is the control of food, and particularly famines. The Great Irish Famine of 1847, 1.1 million people lost their lives, died of hunger or the related diseases. There was a similar famine in Scotland at the same time. Not one person died of hunger. In other words, what happened in Ireland was a very conscious decision to let people starve. Now, it was wrapped up in all sorts of justifications, but the bottom line was nobody starved in Scotland. The other thing, I think, to compare Ireland and the Great Famine of the mid-19th century is actually with what happened in countries like India. So if Ireland was the first English colony, India was the largest. The Bengal famine during the Second World War, Churchill actively took the grain that was destined to feed the starving in Bengal and redirected it to the front. And as a result of that, millions of people died. So again, famine as a tool of empire, we see it happening at the moment in Palestine. The other thing I just want to flag in terms of imperialism is how an ideology of othering goes hand in hand with it. And actually in Ireland, this has a very long history. It goes back to the 12th century and a man called Gerald of Wales, who basically writes a very important tract in which he vilifies the Irish as uncivil, pagan, barbarians. Now, Ireland has never been conquered by the Romans, so it's always regarded as uncivil. But what he is describing takes that othering to another level. Then in the 17th century, it's really picked up in the late 16th, early 17th century by people like John Derrick and above all Edmund Spenser. The Irish now all of a sudden are subhuman. They're vermin. They're insects. They're the lowest of low. And that rhetoric of dehumanization, of course, is all about control. But we see it then cross the centuries and this consistent representation of the Irish as monkey-like, as simians, on an equal with African slaves. And no Irish need apply. Well, that was very much the case in the United States right through the 19th century and in Britain until probably the 1960s. So again, this othering, this ethnocentricity is very much a feature of empire. Now, having depressed everybody, sorry about that, I'll spend the next 10 minutes, hopefully slightly lighter, and talk about the goings. Because of the sea, it brought people in, but of course it's taken people out. And we're going to go right back to the 6th century and say a few words about Ireland as a land of saints and scholars, right through then, of course, course, to the famine and to the present day, where at moments of economic crisis, what do we export? Our people. I mean, we've seen it happen in very recent decades. But let's go back. Here we are. That's Skellig Michael. I'm hoping to go there on Saturday, so everybody pray for good weather. It's, as somebody says in the film, the next step is heaven. It really is absolutely exquisite. And of course, it was settled by Irish monks from really the mid-6th century. So the rest of Europe is in a period known as the Dark Ages, after the fall of Rome. And Irish monks and clerics are responsible for bringing a renaissance of learning to Europe. And that begins at home with the creation of some very, very important monastic sites, many of them within spitting distance of here. I mean, Kerry is just full of them. Here we have Brendan the navigator. You'll see him in his little boat. Now, whether he got to Newfoundland John is a whole other matter, but we don't actually know how far he got. I doubt it was that far. But again, it captures that they were the travellers taking learning with them. They definitely made their mark closer to home. Obviously, we've got Columba in Iona, a hugely important presence in somewhere like Lindisfarne in northern England, and then across continental Europe. I don't know if colleagues have been to Bobbio, which of course is where Columbanus, one of the forefathers who inspired the leaders of the European Union, is buried. There's a wonderful exhibition on, quick plug here for the exhibition, in the National Museum in Kildare Street, where you can see some of these incredible illuminated manuscripts from St. Gallen. I mean, the Irish were absolutely at the cutting edge of knowledge, including scientific knowledge. We were the experts on time. And again, I don't need to go in to the details, but it was this really impressive moment of Renaissance. And it also then captures these very close relationships with continental Europe, which of course continued from this period right through. And they really gains momentum from the mid-16th century on, when we see literally thousands of young women going to study in the convents of Europe, and above all, boys who are going to be educated in Counter-Reformation or in Catholic theology. Increasingly, we also get political exiles going. People have heard of the great Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, and the flight of the Earls. The statue here is from Rathmullen in County Donegal. So you've got this exodus, if you want, of the Gaelic intelligentsia going in the early decades of the 17th century, and then followed over the course of that century, particularly by soldiers, who we now know as the wild geese. And they go in their tens of thousands to the armies primarily of France and Spain, but not just France and Spain. These maps, somebody who's better at drawing maps can help me produce slightly more polished maps, but you get the message, folks. We see the Irish there all over, not just Western Europe, they're all over Scotland, the UK, and then into Eastern Europe as well as North Africa. So very, very extensive migration to Europe. And it's only really in the 18th century that they cross the Atlantic in significant numbers. And I'll come back to that in a moment. This is a map of the globe in about 1660. Obviously, they're all over Europe and Britain, the Irish, but we also have large numbers of Irish, particularly as Jesuits and Franciscans, who are across Asia, across Latin America. They're very effective. If you go to Sao Paulo, a Jesuit from Limerick established the first mission in Sao Paulo. They're extremely active in the Caribbean, and then, of course, increasingly in North America. So whether it's from Canada to Cuba, we find Irish people of every denomination and of every social class. They might be the governors or they might be indentured servants, and then they're everything in between. And they're not just active on the land, they're very active at sea as well. Just say a few words about Canada, given this is such a celebration of Irish-Canadian links. Canada was very much on the sites of, especially Newfoundland, of Irish fishermen from the early decades of the 17th century. We see a number of attempts to set up colonies in Canada. It's really the later 17th century before it's fully colonised parts of Newfoundland, in other words, where they stay for the entire year. And those communities are still very proud of their Irishness today. Many of them are men from Waterford. And when you look at from that small island, when you hear them speak, the Irish accent is just extraordinary. You close your eyes and they could be from literally along the road. It's really quite extraordinary. So from Canada then right down to Cuba, because the Irish are all over the empires of the continental powers as well, especially Portugal, France and Spain. And this gentleman on your right is a man called Ricardo Wall. And by the mid-18th century, Ricardo Wall is running the Spanish Empire from Seville, which is where the archives are today. And his father was one of the wild geese. He was originally from Limerick. It's hard to overstate just how influential and important he was, and how he used his patronage then to secure employment for thousands of other Irish men, including this man, Alejandro O'Reilly, who was a hugely important slave trader in the Atlantic. I had the privilege of going to Cuba not so long ago with Michael D. Higgins, and I was staying I was in the Casa O'Daly in the Calle O'Reilly. I mean, the landscape is just littered with Irish names, and a testament to these early colonists who go as part of these European empires. However, migration really reaches unprecedented numbers from the mid-19th century with the famine. At least 3 million people migrate, often in what we call coffin ships, either leaving directly from Ireland or more commonly from Liverpool, depending on where. The rates, the death rates, 20-30%. And of course, these people are arriving in Canada. And John, I was delighted to see recently you visited Gros-Île. I haven't been, but I would love to go, because I think to visit these places is very important, to honour these people, many of whom we don't even know who they are. They would have arrived as absolute penniless vagrants, with many of them were very ill. They would have had fevers of some kind. Many of them didn't even reach their destination and were thrown ashore because they didn't want to land people with fever. It's very hard for us to understand just how utterly, it's again, I struggle to find words, because the inhumanity of it all is so, Anyway, really, really chilling. Many people do go to Canada, but of course the United States is the preferred destination for those Irish migrants. But the US doesn't want them, doesn't want Catholics. Early settlement of what we call today the US was primarily by Protestant planters, the Ulster Scots. But from the mid-19th century, we're seeing very large numbers of Irish Catholics go, often coming in through Canada. They would have had lives in rural areas. Now, all of a sudden, they're in urban environments. And for generations, at one point, 40% of all the immigrants going into the United States were Irish. I mean, they were absolutely everywhere, and they were regarded as pests. It was only really when John F. Kennedy became the president of the United States that Ireland found its place amongst the elites in the US. We always focus on the US, so I'm not going to do that. I want to also draw your attention to the importance of the Irish in South America, because the Irish were often servants of empires, but they were also often subversives within those empires. So they would help to make the empire, and they helped to unmake it. So we've all heard of Che Guevara. I was in Galway at the film festival last week, and of course we've got his mother was a Lynch from Galway. In the middle there, we've got Bernardo O'Higgins from Sligo. This man here, Bernardo O'Higgins is a hugely important figure in Chile. He helped Chile secure their independence. His father, Ambrose Higgins, had been the Spanish viceroy in Peru. This man here is Admiral William Brown, established the Navy in Argentina, and we still have very large Argentinian communities, Irish communities in Argentina today. But it's this one at the bottom that I like best. A man called William Lamport from Wexford. He writes the first, if you want, Declaration of Independence for Mexico in 1642. The Spanish Inquisition obviously dispatches him, but he also then becomes the basis for Zorro. People familiar with Zorro, maybe it's an age thing. I'm of a certain age where we all watched Zorro. Anyway, based on William Lamport. Wherever we go in the world today, we'll find Irish people. We did a lot of work with Ancestry.com for the documentary. Now, I'm not sure these figures are 100% accurate, I suspect, but proportionately, they'll give you a real sense of where Ireland is in the world. Many of these destinations, aside from the United States, would have been part of the British Empire or the former British Empire. But increasingly, of course, we are seeing Irish people across Asia. And, for example, in the UAE, very vibrant communities of Irish people. And I just love the fact the Asian Gaelic Games is going to be in Bangkok. Save the date, the 22nd, 23rd of November, 2025. Couldn't get any better. All right, I just want to wrap things up and say, well, what does it mean to be Irish at home today? Because if you've seen, we've had waves and waves and waves of people coming in, most probably importantly for the current generation, from the 14th century. By the early 18th century, 1/3 of the population were newcomers. Today, 1/5 of the people living in Ireland weren't born in Ireland. So let's ask ourselves, well, what does that mean to be Irish in Ireland today? And I think it's really important, first, that we acknowledge that even asking that question is contested, because where does all of this leave Britishness? I go back, when I talk about Britishness, to the work of the artist Rita Duffy. She has some very powerful images that speak to particularly partition of the island in 1920, but also the complexities that we as an island nation are working through. And I think the very ambiguity of the Good Friday Agreement and the fact that you can be both Irish and British is fabulous. But it is something that we're still wrestling with, and I think there's no point in shying away from the fact, well, we've just seen the 12th of July pass. The Apprentice Boys will be parading in Derry in a few weeks. These events that occurred in the 17th century are still part of the DNA of people living on the island, and it's how we can address the past in a respectful way to find space for everybody living in the island, as well as the newcomers who are joining us. I think Irishness in Ireland is one thing. What it means to be Irish abroad is a different conversation as well. So when we look at the United Kingdom, in fact, we were having an interesting conversation about that earlier, or the Irish living in Spain, where at home they're not really Irish, or are they? Or I think it's just very, very, very complicated. We have a whole new generation of new Irish who lived in Ireland and then in 2008 went back particularly to Western Europe. What does all of this mean? And how do we respect their senses of Irishness? Today in the globe, something like 80 million people self-identify as Irish. That's an absolutely vast number. I think of all the diasporas, it really is. You've got the Jewish diaspora, the Indian diaspora, the Irish diaspora. I mean, they're in a separate league compared to the other nations. Where we see this manifest itself, of course, is on St. Patrick's Day. Now, it's amazing that America and North America might, turn their rivers green. But in other places, Japan basically closes the major thoroughfare. It really is quite extraordinary to see the Great Wall of China greened for the day. And sometimes we can laugh at the shamroggery or the padawackery or whatever we want to call it, but it is such a testament to the soft cultural power that Ireland has, and there's nothing soft about it actually, its extraordinary influence, particularly, of course, in the United States. The only other country in the world that celebrates St. Patrick's Day as an official holiday is Montserrat. So Montserrat is a volcanic footnote, tiny little island in the Caribbean. But the very fact that it's having St. Patrick's Day as an official holiday, and the fact that the majority of population have Irish names, you have a few of them there, just look at the phone book, it's just full of Irish names, is a testament to the fact that the Irish were there as colonists. And that many of these people today are black people. It's the same in the United States. I think 40% of the black American population have Irish DNA. Now, some of that will have been on the foot of consensual relationships, but much of it will be not. And I think it's really important that we, again, are recognising that. So Leonard asked me to try and pull this together and a few lessons. I'm not sure that I have any for you folks, but let me try. First thing is, it's an extraordinarily complicated and complex history, and at times a dark one. The trauma that the Irish carried, especially in the 17th century as they went to Spain and France, or in the 19th century when they crossed the Atlantic, that trauma haunted them. And is one reason, of course, why America in particular became so important in terms of resisting the British Empire, and why the Americans were so supportive of Irish nationalism. But it's also a story of utter survival. And endurance, that, you know, didn't matter how grim things were, people did manage to survive, prosper. And I think the creativity is something that I am just blown away by time and again, whether that moment when Seamus Heaney got the Nobel Prize, I almost wept. Mary Heaney came to a screening of From That Small Island in Trinity, and when she saw Seamus there, she just put up her hand, and it was just such an emotional moment. But then you look at the creative writers, the actors, the performance on the world stage, it really is something very special. So what I'm really trying to say, Leonard, I don't have any simple answer, because you know what? There aren't any simple answers. I think the important thing is that we ask, it's an enduring question. So thank you very much for that.